Today is another one of our first fives. Today we're looking at this text from Mark chapter 3. And honestly, it's kind of a weird text as we first glance at it. But let's walk through it together and see if we can't come with a little better picture. So here we are, Mark chapter 3, beginning with verse 20. Then Jesus entered a house, and again a crowd gathered, so that he and his disciples were not even able to eat. When his family heard about this, they went to take charge of him, for they said, "He's out of his mind." And the teachers of the law who came down from Jerusalem said, "He's possessed by Beelzebub, by the prince of demons. He is driving out demons." So Jesus called them and spoke to them in parables. "How can Satan drive out Satan? If a kingdom is divided against itself, that kingdom cannot stand. If a house is divided against itself, that house cannot stand. And if Satan opposes himself and is divided, he cannot stand. His end has come. In fact, no one can enter a strong man's house and carry off his possessions unless he first ties up the strong man. Then he can rob his house. I tell you the truth, all the sins and blasphemies of men will be forgiven. But whoever blasphemies against the Holy Spirit will never be forgiven. He's guilty of an eternal sin." He said this because they were saying he has an evil spirit. Then Jesus' mother and brothers arrived. Standing outside, they sent someone in to call him. A crowd was sitting around him, and they told him, "Your mother and brothers are outside looking for you." "Who are my mother and my brothers?" he asked. Then he looked at those seated in a circle around him and said, "Here are my mother and my brothers. Whoever does God's will is my brother and sister and mother." So there's a few things happening in this text, and we're going to talk about really just kind of two of them today. We could spend a long time here, but I'll start with where we ended. Jesus says, "Who are my mother and brother and sisters? Those who do the will of my Father." So in other words, his family, what he's saying is, just because I was birthed into this family doesn't mean long-term they are my family. In fact, my family is, what he's saying to us would be like, for us, we'd understand it this way, my family is the church. Now, for some of us, it's hard because one of the things we don't really love this, but one of the idols we've made in our life is usually our nuclear family, like mom, dad, brother, sister, that kind of thing. Not that those aren't things we should care for and love, but if we're not careful, we can make that an idol above even what it looks like to serve Jesus. Now, moving on, kind of going backward again, there's this scene where I love this kind of picture that Jesus paints, this kind of parable he uses, and he says, well, if a kingdom is divided against itself, it can't stand. See, he's been accused of being someone who's Satan's pawn doing this stuff, but we all know Satan doesn't do good things. He does disruptive, evil, broken things. So in other words, he's not going to heal things. Like, that's not what the devil would do. He might destroy things. He might destroy hands or lives or whatever, but he's not going to heal them. And so Jesus, knowing this, has been accused of being one of Satan's minions, right? So Jesus then says, well, listen, a kingdom can't stand against itself. Like, that's not how that works. A house divided would fall. A kingdom divided. Satan can't divide himself because then he'd be destroyed. It'd be over. So what is Jesus trying to say? That sometimes I think we can look at it this way. When we're looking to find something wrong in the middle of a picture, when we think, well, that person, they're just not all they're meant to be. I think maybe sometimes we try to divide things that shouldn't be divided. Sometimes we don't even realize we're on the same side. Those who came to accuse Jesus are actually on Jesus' side. They really do want God to work in the world. They really do want God's new thing to come. They're just struggling to see that maybe Jesus is that new thing, and maybe the words of Jesus are the new thing God is doing. So the phrase that's old, and it's been attributed to Augustine and John Wesley and many others, and I can't remember, it's obscure person who did in the 1600s, but anyway, the phrase is this: in essentials, unity; in non-essentials, liberty; and in all things, charity. In other words, there are some essential things we believe about the Christian faith that we must hold tightly to. That's not what the Pharisees were asking Jesus about. Hey, what are the essentials? They were just worrying about non-essential things. And then the non-essentials, well, there's a lot of those kind of things. Like if you would believe in some kind of theistic evolution or literal 6 days of creation, honestly, those things are not essentials to the Christian faith. In our tradition, we have a big umbrella, and you can hold either view, and whatever it is, what it is on that. It doesn't change that we believe God's creator, right? That's fine. And then in all things, charity, or all things, love. So in other words, there are some things we hold to be true. We talk about the Apostles' Creed is a great place to start for that. Non-essentials, I mentioned a couple of those, and there's a whole long list of other things we can come up with non-essentials. And in all things, charity. And so what might happen if the church, and I mean the church, the global church, what if we bought into that? What if we figured out, hey, like orthodox, right belief, right understanding, right practice, that's found in the Apostles' Creed and living that out. Fair. God's kingdom coming on earth as it is in heaven. Yep, all in on that. Lord's Prayer, cool. Those are essentials. What are the non-essentials? Okay, that's this list here. And so the problem for us comes in sometimes when we recognize there are definitive essentials, but we get caught up in the non-essentials. And then we get divided. And then this passage of Jesus, this parable that he warns about, he says, listen, the kingdom or a church will be divided against itself, will crumble. What if you and I sometimes find ourselves wrapped up in the non-essentials? And what Jesus is wanting to remind us, even in this text, is let's make sure what we're so concerned about really is an essential and not just a preference or a personal opinion. And so that's a challenge for you and I today. Let's find ourselves wrapped up in the essentials of God. And non-essentials, we'll give some liberty, and in all things, we'll give some charity. So may you and I become more and more followers of Jesus. We'll catch you next time for another First Five.